You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today, I am looking at players in its generally standard fantasy basketball leagues that could be on the verge of being dropped, guys that you might want to drop outright, guys that you can at least consider when you're looking to open up a streaming spot or in 2-for-1 trades or whatever it is you're doing. These guys, I think their value could be a little bit shaky the rest of the season. Michael Bolton?
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed, and we will start, surprisingly, not with Kyle Kuzma. He's going to come a bit later. We're going to talk about Larry Nance of the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs, I thought there was a chance they'd trade Tristan Thompson. I thought there was a chance they'd trade Kevin Love. They did neither of those things, and then, of course, they brought in another big man, relegating Nance to basically fourth big man on the team. So, for a guy that was pushing and getting 26 minutes a night, 25 minutes a night, and really putting up top 100 numbers, that dream is dead. Over the last month, he is the 92nd ranked player. He played 26 minutes a night, averaging 12 and 7.5. Shot 57%. The steals even weren't at the level where they have been for him in the past. But in the first game with Andre Drummond, 20 minutes, 2 points, 4 rebounds. And yes, he shot horribly in that game, but it's those minutes that are the real concern here for Nance. 25, 26 plus, then he gets value. There's no report of Tristan Thompson getting waived, but it doesn't really matter because Love and Drummond are going to be playing the 30 plus minutes as the starters, leaving Nance very little playing time there. Thompson's going to play out the season in Cleveland. So Larry Nance, unfortunately, and this is why, we talk, and people talk about it all the time, and I mention it here often. You can talk about stashes. Who do I stash in case of the trade deadline? And if you stashed Christian Wood, it worked out really well for you. If you stash Larry Nance, it's pretty shit. So it goes that way, and people will often remember, and I'll come back next year and we'll talk about, people will ask me in December, hey, who do I stash in waiting for the trade deadline? Hey, there's a rumor this guy's going to get traded. Do I stash this bloke for 3 months waiting? And people will say, hey, yeah, but it worked out for Christian Wood last year. And yes, and if you did the same thing for Larry Nance, because Kevin Love was definitely getting traded and Tristan Thompson was definitely getting traded, and I stashed Nance, and it didn't work out. So those negative side of things very rarely get remembered unless you actually did that move and stash Nance in that scenario. And it is something to pay attention to that we hit. And again, having a guy who's maybe outside the top 180 for 2 months and then he provides top 50 value down the end, well, that's great in the playoffs. But if you didn't get to the playoffs because you were harboring a guy who was barely a 16-team league player, that is a concern. And that obviously is not going to have any impact if that bloke becomes top 50 after the deadline if you're not in any position to use him in any meaningful games. But I digress here. It just goes back to that long-term stashability of players, which often does not come to fruition, and it did not with Larry Nance. Tristan Thompson, the next guy on my list, similar situation to Nance. Andre Drummond comes in, Thompson moves down to the bench. A guy that I've been preaching all season to try and get any value back in a trade because come fantasy playoffs, he would not be a standard league guy. We're almost at the fantasy playoffs. In fact, in the Red Rock Challenge Leagues, we are in the fantasy playoffs. And Tristan Thompson is not a factor. And I obviously don't get everything right, but to me, this one seemed pretty straightforward. He's the 121st ranked player over the course of the season. Even before this game, the Cavs were winding his production back down, and he hadn't played over 30 minutes since the 20th of January. With Drummond in town, he played 19 minutes, so you can drop him in 12s, in 14s, probably even 16-team leagues. Alec Burks of the Philadelphia 76ers, a guy, again, that we're trying to say get rid of him for any sort of value because he had a pretty decent, I think he was almost a guarantee to be traded, to be honest, with what Golden State was doing this year, and his value was going to disappear. Now, his first game with Philadelphia, he didn't play at all, and then after the game, it came out that he arrived too late, really, really early in that morning in Philadelphia, and they decided it was the best course of action. I don't know why he just arrived on game day when literally was traded like 5 or 6 days ago. That seems a little bit nonsense to me. But Burks, Robinson, Furky from Turkey, Shake Milton, the painter Matisse Thybul, even Josh Richardson. All these guys are going to be competing for minutes there, and there's just not going to be enough there for Burks, who is the 83rd ranked player this season, albeit in a high usage 29-minute-a-night role, which he will have neither of those things in Philadelphia. He is as clear a drop as they come. Let's talk about Rowan Barrett Jr., who has not been good. I think that's fair to say for the Knicks. And I had a thought, and I tweeted this out last night, as I was going to bed and I was scrolling, I don't know if it was Twitter or Reddit or something, and I'm thinking about the Knicks and just the absolute suckiness of so many of these guys. And I wonder how much of it is because of the way that Julius Randle plays and the empowerment that's been given to Julius Randle. Watching him is absolutely, it's frustrating watching Randle try to do spin moves and behind the back passes and head down bully dribble moves. He is not that good. The Knicks empowered him to be their number one guy, which is a horrible move. And I think it's set back the development of guys like Barrett, of guys like even Dennis Smith and Ntilikina, someone like Damian Dotson, someone like Kevin Knox, the Fort, who obviously is pretty close to the worst player in the NBA. Even Mitch Robinson, he's getting no touches because Randle has to dominate everything. In saying that, Randle isn't going anywhere this season, and Barrett is the 261st ranked player this season despite playing 31 minutes a night. He is below average in every single category apart from steals, which is pretty remarkable in itself considering how bad his steal numbers were at Duke last season. But the percentages are absolute killers, 39 and 59.9 from the line, shooting 33% from three. He's averaging under 3 assists, only 5 rebounds, only 1 3 per game on those 33%. He is just not good, and while Marcus Morris might give him more usage, that's a real possibility. That is not a good thing necessarily. And his 3 games since returning from an ankle injury have been rough as shit. He has scored 20 points in those 3 games. He has shot 20 field goal attempts and has made 6 of them. He can be dropped pretty comfortably. This wouldn't be a drop podcast if I didn't mention the future MVP Kyle Kuzma, because he still is rostered in way too many leagues. 68% of them. Actually, he is the 231st ranked player. I don't know what people are expecting from Kuzma. Just get his ass off your team. Pretty straightforward. Michael Porter Jr. Now, Porter was putting up some good numbers, but for a bloke who's been injury prone throughout his career, and now when the opportunity arises, gets injured again, that is absolutely a worry. Now, Paul Millsap's back, Jeremy Grant is playing well, Mason Plumlee's going to be around at some point. I just don't think that the usage or the playing time is necessarily going to be there for Porter to render him a must-roster 12-team league guy. Now, over the last month, he's played only 23 minutes a night. He's been the 57th ranked player. That's really good. Now, out of all these other guys on this list, he's those guys that I've mentioned, Nance, Thompson, Burks, Barrett, Kuzma. Porter's a guy that I hold over all of those guys, and no worry about that. But will he be able to come back and average 13 and 8 in 23 minutes? Will he get 23 minutes when Millsap's healthy? I have significant doubts about that. Yeah, when Will Barton comes back as well, how is that all going to work? Yes, Malik Beasley and Wancho are gone. They weren't guys that were even playing every night, so that's not a huge increase to what he can do. I do think that Porter can be maybe like a 14-team league guy. But for 12s, with the fact that he's dealing with this ankle injury, and if you are struggling and the playoffs are coming and you need that boost, he can at least be considered a droppable guy with the Nuggets starting to get healthier now. Enes Kanter still rostered in far too many leagues. Daniel Tice is back. He's the better player. Kanter's rostered in 56% of leagues. He is the 148th ranked player this season in 19 minutes. And often I'll look at that and say, hey, 19 minutes, that's really good. He can push up. Maybe he gets 25 minutes, but he just won't get 25 minutes. And that's the thing with him. He's stuck in this 18 to 20 minute a night role. When Tice goes down, Kanter's a good stream. The Rock DJ Robbie Williams will be coming back soon, and maybe that eats into what Kanter does as well. He's a points and rebounds guy, and people love that because they're sexy double-digit numbers often. But so little else in those other areas. He is a really good percentage guy, and he can be a useful enough streamer, but not a guy that absolutely has to be a must-roster player. Maxi Kleber had an opportunity, I thought, when Dwight Powell went down with the Achilles injury, but it seems pretty clear to me that he just doesn't work all that well next to Kristaps Porzingis. Kleber was a guy to add, and when these situations happen, you go to these guys, you add them, and you see what happens. Much like the wave pulled D'Anthony Melton after the waiver wire, who's been pretty bad. He can't shoot for shit, and his value really is in steals. But that opportunity was there with Jay Crowder gone, so you take the flyer. And then when it doesn't work out, you move on. As for Kleber, the same opportunity was there with Powell going down. You thought, hey, maybe he can be this top 100 sort of guy that he was when Porzingis was injured, but that just hasn't been the case for him. He's the 150th ranked player over the course of the season, 25 minutes a night for Kleber, and that is totally fine if you're in a 14-team league or a 16-team league. In a 12-team league, being one of the worst players on a roster means that you shouldn't be on a roster, because that position can be streamed in and out pretty comfortably. So Kleber, not a guy we want to hold. And then the last name on this list, it's Morris. It could be Monty Morris. Yes, he's a drop. It could be Marcus Morris. It is, in fact, Marcus Morris, who is now a member of the LA Clippers, a guy that really did have his best season for the Knicks, and part of the problem of them being so bad was Marcus Morris being one of the guys to run their offense. He is not as good as what he thinks he is, and putting him in that sort of position again was a pretty large franchise malpractice. Now, Morris heads over to the Clippers, and he has to not be the first banana, or the second banana, or probably the third banana, or maybe even the fourth banana. So that drops him down pretty far. He is the 80th ranked player over the course of the season, but even including over the last 2 months, he's 110th, and that's with him scoring 20 points per game, because some of the high efficiency has dropped off. His free throws have dropped off. His steal numbers were non-existent. He gets no assists. His rebounds are low. He is a high volume point scorer, and we saw that in that season back in Detroit a few years ago when he was playing a ton of minutes and couldn't even crack the top 100. Like, he has never been a top 100 player in fantasy except for this year, and we'll see where he ends up finishing. But I believe in all 10-team leagues, Marcus Morris is a drop. His first game with the Clippers, it's hard to judge because they won by about 1 million points, but he played 22 minutes and had 10 and 4. He did have 3 steals, which is obviously not something that he does all that often. I believe that he is going to be a fringe back-end 12-team league guy, which means he can be held. Maybe, but it depends what else is out there. And cycling through that spot, streaming, and so many people who listen to this podcast, and it's awesome that so many people are new to fantasy basketball that listen to this podcast or watch this channel. I get this question all the time. What is streaming? Streaming means using one waiver wire spot, one roster spot, and churning through it. I've got Marcus Morris. I drop him. For one day, I'm just going to use names on the list. I add RJ Barrett for a game, and then he plays one game, and I drop him. And then I add Larry Nance because the Cavs play the next day. Then I drop him. And then I add Maxi Kleber because the Mavs play the next day. Then I drop him. So for that roster spot, instead of having a guy at the back end who plays his 3 games during the week, I just churn through waiver wire guys, and I get 6 games out of that spot. That is what streaming guys is. You stream a guy in, you stream him out. So it's just constant flow of players through that last or last 2 roster spots. And Marcus Morris, I think, fits that bill fine. If you want to hold on to him, by all means do it. Again, he's not a drop like Nance and Thompson and Burks and Barrett and Kuzma and Cantor and Kleber. Him and Porter are sort of, maybe I'll hold on to them. I'd probably more hold on to Porter than Morris, but they are absolutely in that discussion when you want to open up some streaming. That'll do it for me in the mini show today. I'll be back later on to recap all of Monday's games and preview Tuesday's action across the NBA. Guys, subscribe Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.